back to those conversations on the Decalogue. We are at "You shall not commit adultery," also known as the sixth commandment. This seems like another one that's just pretty self-explanatory, right? I mean, what else can be said about this other than what Jesus says about it, which finds us all guilty? But this is just basically don't step out on your spouse. This seems simple enough, right?
You ideally, but just like all of them, ideally they're simple enough, right?
Yeah. I mean, and even this is another one that there's probably not a lot of cultures where infidelity is a virtue. I mean, most even people who don't believe in God don't think that that's like the best thing to do. I mean, you watch any TV show and it's a scandal when someone cheats on somebody else, right?
When you take and or teach a world religions class and you do some of the research for it, one of the things that you find is that there will be plenty of, not plenty, but there are examples of cultures around the world where what we would call fornication is sort of expected and or perfectly acceptable. We currently live in that culture. But even in those cultures where it's like a cultural norm for some reason, like maybe even like religiously it's a cultural norm, marriage, even if it's polygamous marriage, is still seen as sanctified. Right? This is a holy thing that's to be respected in a way that just sort of sex itself it isn't. And I'd also sort of clarify on that in people in the comments, I'm sure will correct me if I'm absolutely off base on this, but there aren't many examples of cultures where even just like illicit fornication was the norm. I mean, you do have things like, temple prostitutes in ancient times. And but even though we sort of, and Chad can help me with this too, but in our cultures, prostitution is sort of worse than fornication. But in all cultures, that wasn't the case. Prostitution in many cultures was a necessary job, even religiously, for access to the gods, and so we, like all things on this, you can't take your sort of cultural experience and apply it universally, but it is the idea of respecting the institution of marriage is a fairly universal morality.
Yeah, I mean, Chad, one of the great examples you see of this is when Abraham makes the move and calls Sarah his sister, and then and he does this multiple times, by the way. He's a real genius, but he
worked so well the first time.
Yeah, it worked so well. He did. It did work out great. He got rich out of this deal. Right. It's the most ridiculous thing ever. Hey, I got wealthy the first time. We'll just do this again. But
what you see, great examples of the veracity of the Old Testament to describe our hero of the faith as such an awful human being.
Pimping out his wife.
Yeah. If we go really there, you're so beautiful at 86 or something. Yeah. You're so beautiful that I'm pretty sure Pharaoh's going to kill me and take you. So how about you go over to him anyway? You'll be fine, babe. Don't worry about it. You'll be great.
Yeah, I have all kinds of weird questions about that we won't get into. But what happens the second time is that nothing actually does happen as far as like sexually, and you see that the king is mortified. That this almost happened, right? And he's not some believer in Yahweh kind of guy or anything like that. He's just like, whoa, dude, what are you doing? Like what you, and he's upset because he's like, what you almost made me do.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. In fact, the language he uses there is the language we hear in other Near Eastern cultures. He says that he almost committed a great sin. So a chata gadala. And that particular phraseology is used in other like Egyptian cultures, Ugaritic cultures, where adultery was considered to be the great sin. Now, what's interesting is that particular description of adultery as a great sin is only used in two other contexts in the Old Testament. And both of those, not surprisingly, have to do with idolatry. So the whole golden calf episode in Exodus is called a great sin. And then generations later, when Jeroboam, first king of the northern kingdom, sets up the golden calves at Dan and Bethel, that too is referred to as a great sin, which I say not surprisingly, because in the Old Testament, of course, idolatry and adultery are understood to be just two sides of the same picture. So that when I worship other gods, what am I doing? Well, I'm stepping out on Yahweh.
Yeah.
So I'm being unfaithful to the covenant. Just like if a husband steps out on his wife, he's being unfaithful to her. So anyway, that kind of sets the tone for how this commandment would have been understood. Just like in other cultures, it was always also considered to be a great sin in Israel, but it was always seen as kind of mixed and mingled with idolatry. These two were not that different in essence.
So I don't think, so I brought up last time in the fourth commandment that you get this transition from your relationship with God that he defines, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get this definition that he gives you of your first relationship with another set of people. And then we transition you go to sort of how you, and this could be, even when you're young, before you enter that second great relationship of your life, how you, one of the greatest respect you're supposed to have for that life now, all life, even that life outside your family, with the fifth commandment. And then relationally, just as, and I'm thinking, I'm really like playing the Melanchthon game here and talking about order, how these are ordered, right? You step into the importance of the second great relationship / set of relationships that you will have in this, what would you call it, the second part of your life. The first part, your relationship with your parents, those first people around you, your family, that you're born into. You have to have great respect for life in general, even those outside of your family. And then once you start to make your own family again, the thing that holds any family together is the relationship between the husband and the wife. If that's off, no matter how great your relationship is with your kids at that point, something will be off, and in fact, probably all of off, right? And so it's worth propping up, and it's worth holding in great respect in order to keep all the promises, right? In order for God's promises to be handed down. I think, and anybody who's been through this, either whether they are the ones that had an affair or they were cheated on or initiated a divorce or were the ones that was divorced or whatever, no one comes out of that saying, this was ideal for my family. Right. That this was what needed to happen for my family to be okay. Almost everybody I've ever met that has endured this at some point, again, whether they're the initiators or not, has said this was a terrible time, right? This was not good. And you, as in all the commandments, you see a reflection of that here, whereas God's almost just telling you the obvious all the time. He's like, listen, respect these people that are bringing you up. Hey, that's a great idea. You see that guy over there? Don't go murder him just because.
I always saw him as, I don't know, like sort of circles
moving outward,
reverberating out.
Yeah.
You kind of like with the fourth commandment, we said it sort of restarts or it renames, and then you got the life, and then that primal relationship, and then there's stuff, right?
And it follows the flow of your life in a lot of ways. Even we have not to yet, but even when you get to the covetings, right? Those are following sort of the things that you might look at as you've established your life that you don't have that somebody else might have. You can covet when you're a child, but no child covets to the degree that adults covet. I mean, it's just
true,
a reality. And so this commandment is in one way it's obvious, right? In one way it's a reflection of the law of God written on our heart. And this is why Pharaoh could too find it offensive, and why most cultures do find it offensive. But I really like the way Luther deals with this in the explanation, because he puts the positive side on it too. He doesn't talk about just what you're not supposed to do, but the implication of what this means that you are supposed to do, or at least try to do, or try to keep foremost in your mind, which is honoring and respecting this person that God has given to you to be your helpmate, to be your partner.
Yeah. I think that's all exactly right, Scott. And when Jesus takes this and he says, hey, you've heard don't commit adultery. I say that anyone that's looked at a woman with lust has committed adultery in her heart. Sometimes people will do this thing where they're sort of like, okay, well, this makes everyone an adulterer, and it does. I mean, before in the eyes of God, right? So as far as God is concerned, just a bunch of adulterous people walking around, which shouldn't be a foreign idea, because God is like the number one thing He calls His people constantly through the Old Testament.
Yeah, right.
Adulterers. I mean, it's like that's their nickname. But that is not to say that that there isn't a difference. I mean, it's sort of like with murder. Before God, like we're all a bunch of murderers because we have people that we hate. But when that sin moves from heart to hand, then there's actual like harm that is done in a very physical way, right? Same is true for adultery, where everyone walking around with lust in their heart is an adulterer. When that moves from heart to hand, then you have some real physical ramifications done. And I'll tell you this, those are real and not fun. And if you hear God say don't murder, you can say like, well, obviously, or even maybe don't steal, and you're like, yeah, I kind of want stuff, but yeah, like, obviously. Don't commit adultery is like commit yourself to this one person, and there is sort of this like, oh man, like because like that sounds like, but now it sounds like you are telling me not to have a good time, but the opposite is true, not a good time. He's not holding out on you. Like if you let this thing move from heart to hand, this is not going to be fun. Because it's destructive and horrible to go through.
Yeah, there's incredible collateral damage, right?
Yeah.
It's not just the husband or the wife who suffers, because it's going to affect the children, it's going to affect friends, it affects parents and family. I mean, in the history of Israel, you see how it even affected the whole nation. So the ripple effect of it is far beyond what most people would realize. And so God is trying to protect kind of the core of society, right? He's protecting the family through the honor of the parents. He's protecting the marriage by prohibiting adultery. So his concern is to make sure that there's this kind of stability within these core units of Israel, so that ultimately his covenant is kept, right? And his word and his promise are promulgated. So it's never just God kind of trying to stomp out fun or just kind of lay down rules. It's always broader than that, because if marriages disintegrate or if families disintegrate, then his word and his promises are also going to fall by the wayside.
Yeah. I think that's right. And I do think that the when you have the association with idolatry, there's no adultery without idolatry. This is not a thing that happens.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. That's never occurred to me, but to be simplistic, they even sound the same.
Yeah. I mean, they one precedes the other, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I was gonna say, when you're telling that story, my dad died very young, and then I was very close to my grandpa, and he died when I was 10. And this whole time, I was very close to a man who we just called my Uncle Rick, who was like, for our entire family, like our extended family, who all lived within like 10 miles of each other. He was sort of like the patriarch at that point, right? And at some point, I think I was 12 or 13, he had an affair, and my aunt and uncle got divorced. And the ramifications of Rick leaving the family didn't just stop with my Aunt Della or my cousins, it went on to my mom, who had no husband, and who, as a family, we really relied on my Uncle Rick for helping with some of the maintenance stuff around our house. And just, the fact that he was the one that would take my brother and I camping and pick us up for Sunday school, and, just all of this stuff. The ramifications were, you couldn't have laid them out on a chart, and accurately reflected how deep they went. And then I could just even say for me personally, that was the last man in my life. That was the last man in my life. And now he was just all of a sudden gone. Yeah. And, I certainly, and I know how children, can feel responsible in these situations, but I wasn't responsible. But yet he was so critical to me. And to say that this is an important one is to sort of understate it in a sense, right?
Well, the thing that it does, Scott, is it at the very least it devalues you as a recipient of the effects of this thing, because at the very least you ask the question, well, man, you didn't care enough about our relationship or enough about me to not do that thing. And and this is the thing that enters everyone's mind that is affected. Like, dude, you didn't really think this through, did you? I mean, you just disregarded everybody that was close to you, everybody that loves you, everybody that this would hurt, and you just did it anyway. And this is why the correlation with idolatry is so right, because what ends up happening is when you become an idolater, when you're rolling around with idolatry, you don't see anything else. You don't consider anything else. I mean, this is your God at that point, and that's all you see. I don't think that. I'm sure, because I mean, in the aftermath of something like this, of course, like when you audit the whole thing, you're for sure. I mean, maybe not everybody, but if you're repentant anyway, you're like, what in the world? Like this is the dumbest thing in the world. If you had just taken the time to like write this all out, like, well, what's going to happen here? Like, what's the price tag on this? You're going to be like, well, there's no way I'm paying that. That's way too high. But you don't do that, because that's not what an idolater does.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I think the idolatry blinds you to the after effects of the sin, because as you rightly said it, you become just focused on nothing more than whatever this thing is. It's become your God, and that takes up all of your heart. Everything is directed toward that end, and so you end up behaving in egocentric ways in which all that really matters is getting whatever it is that you want, and everything else and everyone else be damned. You might not be thinking that consciously, but that's what's happening inside. That's what leads you to that particular act.
Yeah, and that's why if you have no other gods, you won't end up there.
Yeah, all goes back to the first commandment.
Always goes back to the first.
Yeah.
All right, I think we covered it.
Yeah, I think so.
Except for to say, even in this and all the damage that it can do, there is forgiveness in Christ for those who have fallen into this sin. I mean, I think more than a lot of the ones we've done, this is going to hit some people personally, and they need to know that Christ's death has covered even this.
Yeah, and that the promise remains. That I mean, I've said this many times, but when we hear Paul say that God works all things together for good, he's necessarily talking about the bad things, because there's nothing special about working good things out for good.
Like, he will make you hitting the lottery work out for your good.
It's not.
Imagine that.
That's not the sort of thing Paul's talking about, right? So I mean, he is talking about bad things, and it doesn't mean that the thing the thing itself is good. The thing itself is not good.
Yeah, the thing itself is sin.
The thing itself is not good at all. But that this is how good God is that he can take something that's so bad and that he can do good things through it, right? It doesn't mean the thing remains bad, but there are things that he is able to do and that only he can do through it. And that's the sort of God that we have. I mean, the sort of God that claims you as his own. He's the sort of God that says, you are mine. I am the Lord your God, right? And I'm the only one that could take something this disastrous and actually pull something good out of it, bring something good from it.
The Lord our God, as we began this, used the story we told of Abraham and Pharaoh and Sarah, and from that extended story brought about the Messiah.
Right, exactly. So Is there forgiveness? Absolutely. I would even say not only is there forgiveness, there's life on the other side of it too.
Yeah.
That only God can bring about.
Amen.
All right. Well, that's it. We will be back next time with another one that seems self-evident. I mean, don't go stealing stuff, but we'll find out that we're all a bunch of thieves, I'm sure. So see you guys then.